It's been a while since I painted with ink, so today I just decided to repaint a classic piece. I've got a few flash books here and I decided on this piece by Bob Shaw, which I then just transferred to some hot press arches. For materials, I'll be using Ecoline acrylic inks, some generic watercolor brushes, and I like to use these pens that fill with water. It's just a bit more convenient for spit shading. For my lining, I'll be using a 5B Speedball round nib, and I'm trying some Winsor & Newton calligraphy ink. And now we'll just start by lining the whole piece up. With nibs, the main thing is to keep a consistent angle to the paper, and you're meant to use your whole arm rather than just your wrist. I kept forgetting to do that, which is why some of the lines came out a bit uneven. This section is just sped up a bit, but I do pull my lines a lot slower, and with nibs, you're always meant to pull the lines towards you. I decided to start doing repaints because a couple months ago I went to a shop near me and asked for some critique and advice on my portfolio, and the artist there suggested I buy some classic flash books and study the legends in traditional tattooing, which then led me to Bob Shaw's work, who has now become one of my favorites. Bob Shaw actually started as a teenager working around the corner from Bert Grimm's shop as a dishwasher, and he'd hang around their shop, eventually working with Bert's wife Julia with her photography. Eventually he asked Bert Grimm to teach him how to tattoo, and by 16 he had already had both his sleeves done. Growing up inside that early traditional tattoo scene, he worked alongside other legends like Colonel Todd and Earl Brown, and became a well-known figure in American tattooing himself. Now that the line work is done, I'm going to go in and fill in all of the black areas. I just like doing this to remove as much negative space early on. For spit shading, I'll lay down a line of ink and then pull it back with a clean wet brush, and I'll keep wiping it off on a paper towel and rinsing it to remove any ink I've picked up. Since I haven't painted in a while, the first few blends did come out a bit rough, but as long as the ink is still wet and hasn't sat still too long, you can just keep reworking it. And I've also just got up the original piece to my right, which I'm just using as reference for my painting. Traditionally, artists would wet the brush with their saliva and use it to pull the ink out, which is where the name spit shading comes from. And when I want the gradient to end, I'll just keep lifting the pigment off with a clean brush and then wiping it off as I go. With hot press, I feel like I'm just pushing the ink around instead of pulling the ink outwards. Now I'm laying down the gray and then moving on to the yellow. I always work with light to dark so that the darker inks don't later bleed into those lighter spots. Here I'm just mixing up a skin tone, and I'll always test it on a scrap piece of paper first and wait, since the colors tend to shift slightly as it dries. In my experience, hot press is a bit trickier for blending. I think since it doesn't have as much texture to hold the ink in, it can run a little bit, but it's perfect for lining with like a nib or a fine liner, and I prefer it to cold press now. You'll see me doing 2 layers of color a couple times in this piece. I don't usually do that, but I wanted it to be darker and more saturated, so I had to build that up. At this stage, it does look a bit uneven, but again, as the ink is still wet, I can still work it, so I just keep pulling the blend until it's smooth to my liking. I find black can be more forgiving for spit shading. You can do quite a few layers of it and just keep reworking it. I notice for color you have to work faster, because if the ink stays still for too long, when you try to blend it out, you'll see streaks and water spots. I really like these Ecoline inks for how vibrant they are. My go-to was the FW acrylic inks, since they wouldn't bleed at all, but they're more opaque and they would leave a chalkiness once it dried. I really enjoyed painting again, and I hope to do some more soon. I'll be going abroad to Taiwan in a month, so I'm trying to get as much done before I'm just limited to my iPad again. And by no means am I a professional or a tattoo artist. I just wanted to show my process of painting these traditional pieces. Finally, I'm now just finishing it off with the green. I did do 2 layers of all the green as well, since it was a bit too light for me and the gradient wasn't distinct enough. And here's the finished piece.